My name is Jack Williams. I will later on be known and remembered as Pharmacist Mate Third Class. I'm going to take some time out tonight to tell you about some of my life, achievements, and military career. I, Pharmacist Mate Third Class Jack Williams, was born in Harrison, Arkansas on October 18th, 1924. I was born to my mother, who was Dotry Edith Williams. She was a daughter of Charles Edward Gooch and Rebecca Jane Stonecipher. My mother had 8 siblings. Her brother's name was Richard, who died in Harrison, Virgil Earl, who died in California, Lloyd, who lives in Pampa, Texas, Elizabeth, who lives in Abilene, Texas, Maddie Mae Garrison, Almaine Fowler, Veda Van Ness, and Ruby Thomason, who all still live currently in Harrison, Arkansas. My father was William Orwell Williams, also known as Bill. He had 3 sisters, Nellie Smith, Mamie Raines, and Tessie Williams. His paternal grandparents was Judge Sam B. Williams and Eliza Williams. My parents and their families were longtime residents of the Harrison, Arkansas area. My parents at one point moved to Kansas City, and when my father developed cancer and suffered a long-time illness and later on died in Harrison, Arkansas. He is buried along with my mother and sister Fern in Maplewood Cemetery. Before they died, they lived a great life. They were successful. My father, Bill, was a blacksmith and had a shop down near the creek close to Main and Walnut Streets. He later worked for the Arkansas Highway Department. My mother was a seamstress and sewed many of me and my siblings' clothes. One of my favorite outfits was my overalls. It was your typical farm clothes, for farm kids, of course. We faced some difficult and hard times. These times were during the 30s, during the Great Depression years. We worked hard and made do with what we had. We had a milk cow and your usual chickens. We lived in quite a few houses. I remember our very first house. It sat in what was roughly a pasture and is no longer standing. The area had been subdivided. We then later moved to a house near Maplewood Cemetery. You might know it as the old house near standing between the Catholic Church and the cemetery. I walked to school mainly when we lived here. We later then moved east of town, off Silver Valley Road near the old Milam Cemetery. It seemed we had a knack for moving to places with cemeteries. We rented a place on a farm owned by the Johnsons. Unfortunately, it no longer stands. When it did stand, this farm years before had produced cotton, but we didn't actively farm it. It was a very nice place though, as farmhouses went during that time. It had 3 bedrooms. There was a nice screened-in porch, which we thoroughly enjoyed as a family. I remember the times we would sit out there drinking coffee, tea, or whatever we decided to drink and enjoy the scenery. It was just so peaceful. We attended faithfully Harrison Methodist Church. This was when it was down on Stevenson Street and long before it was damaged by a nearby explosion. That was a very unfortunate event that had occurred. I had many hobbies. My hobbies included fishing in a nearby Crooked Creek. I always found that relaxing. I remember the feeling of being out on a beautiful spring day, listening to the water rush by. I was standing and I could feel the coolness of the water as it went past my feet and legs. I loved to fish and often would carry my catch off to Grandma's. I loved Grandma's house. She was such a sweet lady. God rest her merry soul. She would take the catch I caught, which was normally perch, small fish, just pan-fried stuff. She would cook them up for me and I would be eating my fish with a feeling of enjoyment of something that I had done. As I got older, not only did I enjoy fishing, I enjoyed hunting. I had a handy-dandy .22 rifle. It couldn't kill much, but maybe some squirrels, rabbit, and some small game, but it was my trusty primary arm. I also really thoroughly enjoyed hiking. It was just something about getting out to nature and the basics of life. It was nature and I just walked and enjoyed the beauty of God that God created, the serenity, the large, green, luscious trees, the sound of birds chirping away with no care in the world. I would see animals of all sorts, the beautiful blue sky with clouds as puffy as marshmallows, the sun shining through the clouds with rays cutting through the trees like a new burst of life. I even enjoyed hiking with my friends. That was a very enjoyable experience that I had enjoyed. We would enjoy God's beautiful serenity together. I found music to be very soothing as well. I was giving a violin and took lessons for quite a while. I later used my violin in which to keep money. I had saved from jobs to buy my mother a dress. When I was in high school, I worked in the evening at a Roy Klepper sandwich shop near the Lyric Theater. We were always known for our good chili. And you know what they say, nothing is like a good bowl of chili, especially during the winter months. I also worked selling tickets for the Lyric Theater on the square, which is still standing strong and tall to this day. I hope to save enough money to buy a farm. While in high school, I was a member of FFA, Future Farmers of America, and planned to be a farmer. I will never forget one day when I was in class, the president came on the radio and the very U.S. was rocked by unforeseen destruction. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt addressed the nation with his infamous speech. Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, member of the Senate and the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at that solicitation of Japan was still in the conversation with its government and its emperor looking for them maintenance of peace in the Pacific. Indeed, 1 hour after Japanese air squadrons had commenced bombing in the American island of Oahu, the Japanese ambassador to the United States and his colleagues delivered our Secretary of State a formally reply to a recent American message. And while this reply stated that it seemed useless to continue the existing diplomatic negotiations, it contained no threat or hint of war or the armed attack. It will be recorded that the distance of Hawaii from Japan makes it obvious the attack was deliberately planned many days or even weeks ago. During the intervening time, the Japanese government has deliberately sought to deceive the United States by false statements and expansion of hope for continued peace. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. Yesterday, the Japanese government also launched an attack against Malaya. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Hong Kong. Last night, Japanese forces attacked Guam. Last night, Japanese forces attacked the Philippine Islands. Last night, the Japanese attacked Wake Island. And this morning, the Japanese attacked Midway Island. Japan has therefore undertaken a surprise offensive extending throughout the Pacific area. The facts of yesterday and today speak for themselves. The people of the United States have already formed their opinions and well understand the implications to this very life and safety of our nation. As the Commander-in-Chief of the Army and the Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the characters of onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome the premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win the absolute victory. I believe that I interpret the will of the Congress and the people when I assert that we will not only defend ourselves to the utmost, but will make it very certain that the form of treachery shall never again endanger us. Hostilities exist. There is no blinking as the fact that our people, our territories, and our interests are in grave danger. With confidence in our armed forces, with the unbounding determination of our people, we will gain the inevitable triumph. So help us God. I ask that Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire. I joined the Navy and was shipped to the West Coast. I received training in the U.S. Medical Corps where I graduated as a hospital apprentice, second class. 6 months later, I moved to a first-class rank with 2 qualified assistants and improved for medical field services. I was later on assigned to the Marines, where I cared for the wounded in some of the bloodiest fighting in the Pacific of World War II. In January 1944, I received orders to the Field Medical School Battalion, Camp Elliott, San Diego, and transferred a few months later to Headquarters 5th Marine Division at Camp Pendleton, California. In May 1944, I was promoted to Pharmacist Mate, 3rd Class, the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marine Regiment, 5th Marine Division. I participated in the Battle of Iwo Jima on March 3rd, 1945. There was a Marine who was wounded forward of the front lines. I went to assist him in the middle of a grenade fight. Grenades were flying everywhere. The smell of smoke filled the airs. My ears were ringing from the explosions going off around me. Men were dying around me, cries of pain and agony over lost parts and wounds, and men praying and asking God, "Please help me make it through." There is so much I want to do. Death filled the air with its bitter stench of sulfur and burnt flesh. Death's hand painted a picture with dirt and blood and the victims it claimed. The only time men cried besides the loss of a loved one was here, on the battleground. Here they would play their lives on repeat in their heads. They would think of what they would have done in their life, what they would have done differently. They would cry like a baby would if they wanted their mama. The thought of how their life would have been. They would cry and cry forever with the thought of how life would have been, with their last words being, God be with me and God be with my family. Silenced forever. I remember these 3 particular comrades, Marines that I went to assist. It was in the Battle of Iwo Jima. My heart was struck as a raven would quote nevermore. Grenades were flying everywhere. Bullets whizzing by like darts of hot metal and death. I tried to assist Marine after Marine after Marine. These particular men, Marines, played this exact scenario as they were wounding and dying. The first one I assisted and went to patch up his wounds. He was a man of disarray and distraught. I kept trying to assure him everything was going to be all right. We can get through this, even if it wasn't. Because he needed hope. We all needed hope. As I was assisting him, I was hit by a sniper bullet. I kept working on him, binding his wound, forgetting about my own. I got him patched up and went to another dying Marine. I was moving frantically as bullets were whizzing by, grenades going off, my ears ringing like the bells of Notre Dame. I got to him, binded his wound, patching him up, and then again a second shot. As I was assisting this fellow comrade, I ignored my own wound as I was finishing up on this fellow Marine, assuring him that everything is going to be all right. I spotted another Marine down, still ignoring my own wounds, working as hastily as possible with the wounds that have got to me. My breath is becoming shorter with each step I take. Grenades and bullets whizzing by. I get to him and he was bleeding out profusely. This poor soul was becoming hysterical and hemorrhaging. I tried to calm him down, assure him, and tending his wounds. I got him calmed down and tended his wounds completely. Then as I went to tend my own wounds, there was a final sound I heard. They say during the Revolutionary War there was a sound that was heard around the world. The last here was a sound that would silence me forever. It was one single sniper shot.